Hello everyone, my name is McKenna Edwards and today I will be teaching about cinema technologies. It is chapter 10 in the book if you want to follow along. We do live in a century today where it's mass storytelling. It's all about the story and how the characters evolve and interact and we immerse ourselves into a different life whenever we watch movies. So the cinema evolved as a technological institution. Most of it originated during the course of the industrialization in Europe and America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So it kind of originated with film, the camera, the projector, and sound recording. Filmmaking kind of turned into an art form after the mechanical reproduction and mass distribution of the story. Like I said, we now live in a century of mass storytelling. Even from the early years, people wanted that story to come to life. Mark Zoradi, he was a former president of Walt Disney's Studio Motion Pictures Group, has stated the key to a good film has always been story, story, story. But in today's environment, it's story, 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 and blow me away. We're constantly looking for that wow factor in films. I know whenever I want to walk into the movie theater, I want a movie to where I will not forget. I want to be fully involved into the character story. I want to kind of drown everything else. I just want to be submersed into the movie, and I want to leave knowing that I got my money's worth. I want to leave feeling, wow, that's a good movie. I'm sure everyone can relate to that feeling. So let's just get started with the background of cinema technologies. There's a lot that has happened in such a short period of time. There's a lot of advances that have happened. So just bear with me as we kind of highlight on the major things. I would recommend following along in the book if you want to. That might make it a little bit easier. Like I said, it is a lot of history that's kind of compacted into one just because there was constant advancement. So it kind of started off with the photography, and that was kind of between the dates of 1826 and through 1839. Roll film became a thing in the 1880s. The Kodak camera was invented in 1889. George Eastman's motion picture film was invented in 1889. The motion picture camera happened in 1891 through 1893. And then the motion picture projector was created in 1895 through 1896. So that's just kind of an overview of, the general history. There's also a timeline on my presentation that kind of highlights some history, and it kind of breaks it up, so that might be a little easier to follow as well. So just kind of getting right into it, after all those advancements, W.K.L. Dixon, he was a research assistant at Edison Laboratories, invented the first authentic motion picture camera, the kineograph, which was first constructed in 1890 with a patent granted in 1894. In fact, this basic technology of the modern film camera of today is still almost identical to this early device. So it was a huge advancement in cinema technologies. So after viewing the kinetoscope in Paris, the Lumiere brothers began thinking about the possibility of turning that to projecting films to a screen and for a paying audience. So in 1894, this kind of started the working of the cinematograph. And so in 1895, the Lumiere brothers demonstrated their cinematograph for the first time. So that was kind of where this kind of idea of taking, motion picture and turning it into films for a paying audience began. And then another key thing to highlight, which I thought this was a cool thing that was mentioned in the book, Alice Guy Blanche, who was the first director of either sex to bring a story film to the screen. She did this with the 1896 release of a 1-minute film, La Fille aux Couches. which translates to the Cabbage Fairy. So Alice Skye Blanche was cinema's first story designer, and she kind of developed this new thing of the art of the cinematic narrative. She became the first and only female to own and run her own film studio. And at that time, that, in 1896, that was kind of almost, that was unheard of. And it was, I just think that it was really cool as a female to see early years of female kind of coming to light and being a leader of this industry. And so kind of over the years of this whole film thing, middle class American audience started, these were the people that grew up reading complicated plots and characters of authors like Charles Dickens and Charlotte Bronte. They wanted more sophisticated film narratives. They wanted kind of more of that story coming to life in films. So this led D.W. Griffith to become the creator of the modern narrative form and created parallel editing to kind of give them that need. For the first 2 decades of cinema, majority of the films were shot outside. Over time, the industry outgrew the small improvised facilities and they needed something more. So this has kind of led, the industry to move to California, where the weather would allow them to shoot ideal outside scenes, as well as them to be creating, these large sound stages to improve their films. So by the second decade of the 20th century, Hollywood became the heart of American cinema, and filmmaking evolved into a 3-phase business structure: the production, distribution, and exhibition, to allow their film to get from the studio to the theater faster. So by 1932, Technicolor was being introduced into films, allowing them to finally be in color. And then in 1952, Cinerama launched a widescreen revolution. This kind of shaped the whole motion picture screen industry. So it required a widescreen process that filmed with a 3-lens camera, and it projected it across synchronized projectors onto a deeply curved screen. It sounds complicated, but it made a full width of the movie theaters. And so in the 1960s, people went from viewing movies at drive-ins to single-screen theaters to multi-screen cineplexes. More recent developments of cinema technologies, in 1895, the Edison Studios showed the head of the Queen being chopped off, and the historical dramatization of the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. So this was kind of where visual effects was first introduced. It kind of led the industry to now be dominated by visual effects. To build on top of that, in 1971, the Andromeda Strain was the first film to use computers to create visual effects. And this was very advanced for that time. And then on top of that, a few years later, in 1976, American International Pictures released Future World, which first used 3D CGI. And since then, CGI technology has advanced rapidly. And so now film is slowly fading into digital, just with technological advances. For example, a horror film that was released in 2009, Paranormal Activity, was only shot with a digital camcorder. So there's a lot of films now being released that were shot with just a digital camera. And this kind of allows the production to never leave the digital environment. Moving on, another advancement, the first digital 3D movie was Chicken Little, and was released by Disney in 2005. In 2012, nearly 90,000 movie theaters converted to digital by the end of the year. So just kind of now moving into the current status of film and kind of some facts about where it's at. The book was released in 2015, so this was a few years ago. But the global box office showed that all films released around the country earned a total of $36.4 billion in 2014, and that was a 1% increase over 2013's total. In 2015, the average price for a movie ticket in the U.S. was $8.43. and they sold a total of 1.34 billion tickets. And then, so here are just a few factors to watch in cinema technologies over, in the next few years. Digital cinema camera designs are starting to shift toward larger sensors, just because people are wanting more. So more pixels, more dynamic range, larger sensors, and more data. As technology advances, so does cinema technologies. So there's going to be the want for more in here in the next few years. And on top of that, with the creation of the cloud, I know most of you guys are probably familiar with this. The entertainment industry has taken advantage of working in it. Unfortunately, the film industry has been kind of late into working with the cloud, as it does have some advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages of it with recent implementations of distributed post-production and cloud computing, it would make it a lot easier for them. With other changes and innovations, future moviegoers will probably look at, today's most popular films as kind of how we look at, the silent movies that were produced in the earlier years of the film industry, just because it's constantly changing, and then new ways of filmmaking. Just kind of an example of this is, the whole streaming service now. You can, get a movie, you can stream a movie online, just like that. So I personally think what's going to happen is that movie theaters are going to see a decline, just because I think they're going to offer some form of streaming service. That's just my predictions, just because streaming is starting to become more of a popular thing in today's technology. Working in the film industry, it is a highly competitive industry to work in. And then most people go to a university. They participate in a film program just to help them teach them about the art and craft of visual storytelling. But there is still a huge difference between learning about film and audio and actually being on a professional set. And so, in fact, when people graduate from these universities, most people only start out with an internship, and they have to kind of work their way up and prove their worth. But once you establish yourself in the industry and build a reliable network, people start to see the success, and they start to reap the benefits of the industry. It's just, you kind of have to put the work in the earlier years and kind of show that you are serious about the industry. So that's kind of an overview of the chapter. I'm going to leave you with kind of a two-part question. So as I mentioned, the film industry is constantly changing, and so does what the audience wants to see. So my question is, how do companies in the industry determine what movies will be successful? And on top of that, how do you think they know how much to budget for each film? I want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to me go over Chapter 10. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing your guys' answers. Thank you.